I have been the head librarian of the Wexham Free Library for 41 years, and I have asked rich men for money more times than I have asked for a cup of tea. Most of them have said no politely. A few have said yes, in small amounts with a thin smile. One and only one said yes for the whole roof, the whole new wing, the whole children's room expansion, the whole 20-year endowed fund for the music collection, on a single September evening in his own library, because of a wager he made with my quiet young assistant and a blindfold he tied with his own handkerchief. I am Margaret Holloway, I am 63. The young assistant was Tessa Lynn, she was 24. The rich man was Mr. Vincent Ashworth of Ashworth Hall, who collects pianos the way other men collect paintings, and who was, that September, 68 years old and not at all the kind of patron a head librarian dares to pursue, because he had said no to every public cause request laid in front of him in 15 years. I had been invited to Ashworth Hall that evening to drink one drink and ask one polite question and leave. Mr. Ashworth's secretary had been very clear. I had been told to bring no proposals, no glossy folders, no plans. I had been told to bring myself. I had asked the morning before whether I might bring my assistant, since Tessa drove me everywhere now that my eyes had begun to fail at night. The secretary had said yes, as long as Tessa stayed in the kitchen with the cook. That, in the end, was the part of the evening that did not happen. I will tell you about Tessa first. She had come to the Wexham Free Library 2 years before from a postgraduate library science course at the City College, where she had been the quietest student in her year and had finished first in her exams. She was the daughter of 2 postmen. She spoke very little. She did her work without flourish. She had reorganized our music collection in her first 8 months on a system so quietly intelligent that the music librarians of the county had taken to coming up to Wexham on Saturday mornings to see how she had done it. She had not, in 2 years, told me she could play the piano. She had not, in 2 years, told me anything at all about herself that I had not had to ask twice. I knew she could play because once, on a Sunday afternoon, I had walked back to the library to fetch a book I had forgotten, and I had heard the upright in the children's corner being played softly by someone who was not, to my ear, the volunteer who usually played it. I had stood at the back of the stacks for perhaps 4 minutes. I had not gone forward. I had recognized the piece. It was the slow movement of the Schubert impromptu in G-flat major, Opus 90 No. 3, and the person playing it was playing it the way the great recording of Wilhelm Kempff plays it, which is the way I have, in private, considered to be the only way. When the piece ended, I had walked very quietly back out the door. I had not spoken of it to Tessa. I had assumed, the way old librarians assume, that the people we work with will tell us what they want us to know. Mr. Vincent Ashworth's drawing room that September evening was a long oak-paneled room at the south end of the hall. It had been the music room of Ashworth Hall for 140 years. It contained in its long western wall a row of 7 pianos. I'm not making that up. 7 pianos, a Bösendorfer Imperial, a late 19th century Erard, a Pleyel from the year of Chopin's death which Ashworth had bought at auction in Paris in 1992, 2 modern Steinways, a small forte piano from 1810, and at the center of the row, a Blüthner concert grand of impossible polish, the one Ashworth himself sat at on the evenings he was alone. I had been brought into the room by his butler. I had been served the one drink. Mr. Ashworth had sat in a velvet armchair across from me with his own drink. He was that evening in the dark gray suit he wore for every meeting that was not white tie. He had a small precise gray beard and the slow careful manners of a man who is never in a hurry because the world has for 40 years been waiting for him. He had asked me, politely and with no real interest, what brought me out to the hall. I had said what I had been told to say, 1 drink, 1 polite question. I had asked him whether he would consider, only consider, receiving a brief letter from the library's trustees regarding the roof. He had said he was not in the habit of receiving brief letters about roofs. He had said he was very sorry. He had wished us well. He had been, in short, beginning to end the evening, in the polite and final way these evenings always ended at Ashworth Hall. That was the moment the butler appeared at the door and said, "Sir, your driver has asked me to inform you that the young lady from the library has come up from the kitchen. She wished to be sure that Mrs. Holloway was ready to leave. She is in the corridor." Mr. Ashworth said, "Bring her in. We shall not keep them waiting." The butler stepped out. Tessa came in. She was wearing a plain dark dress and the brown jumper she always wore in autumn, and she had her hands clasped in front of her the way she clasped them at the desk. She bowed her head to Mr. Ashworth very politely and said, "Mr. Ashworth, thank you for having Mrs. Holloway out this evening. I will not interrupt. I will be in the corridor." She turned to leave. Her eye, on the way past the row of 7 pianos along the western wall, paused for a fraction of a second on the Blüthner at the center. She did not stop walking, but the fraction of a second was a real fraction, and Mr. Ashworth, who has the eyes of a man who has spent his life watching what people look at when they think nobody is looking, saw it. He said, "Miss." She said, "Lynn, sir, Tessa Lynn." "Miss Lynn, you looked at the Blüthner." "I did, sir, I beg your pardon." "Do not beg my pardon, do you know what it is?" "A Blüthner concert grand, sir. The polish suggests a recent rebuild, perhaps the late 1990s. The case is older, forgive me, I do not mean to be forward." There was a small silence. Mr. Ashworth set his glass down on the small table beside him. He looked at her for what felt to me like a long time. Then he said, "Sit down, Miss Lynn. Margaret, sit down, you are not leaving yet. I would like to know how an assistant librarian knows the date of a Blüthner rebuild on a glance." Tessa did not sit. She remained standing. She said, "My father has played piano all his life, sir. He has taken me to look at pianos in showrooms since I was small. He taught me what to look at." "Your father is a pianist." "My father is a postman, sir. He plays in the evenings. He taught my brother and me." "And do you play, Miss Lynn?" "A little, sir." "A little?" He smiled the small smile of a man who has heard a little from a great many people and learned the various things it can mean. "Margaret, would you mind if I asked Miss Lynn to play the Blüthner for me for 2 minutes? I should like to hear what a postman teaches his daughter in the evenings." I did not know what to do. I looked at Tessa. She looked at me. She gave the smallest nod. I said, "Tessa, dear, if you would like to." She walked to the Blüthner. She did not crack her knuckles. She did not flex her fingers. She sat on the bench, set her hands on the keys, and played the first 30 seconds of the slow movement of the Schubert impromptu in G-flat major. I will tell you what happened to Mr. Ashworth's face in those 30 seconds. The small smile went. The polite and final look went. He sat forward in the velvet armchair. He set both of his hands flat on his knees. His mouth opened a quarter of an inch and did not close again until Tessa let the last chord of the phrase settle and looked up politely at the end of the half-minute. He said, "Miss Lynn." "Yes, sir." "You play the Schubert G-flat as well as anyone I have ever heard play it in this room. I have heard a great many people play it in this room, including," and here he named, casually, 3 of the most famous living pianists, all of whom had been guests at Ashworth Hall in the last decade. "Where did you train?" "Nowhere properly, sir. My father mostly. A teacher at the parish hall when I was a child. I could not afford the conservatory." "Could not, I see." He sat very still for a moment, then he stood up. He walked across the long oak-paneled room to the row of 7 pianos. He stopped at the Blüthner. He laid his hand on its lid the way a man lays his hand on the shoulder of his oldest friend. Then he turned to Tessa and to me and said, "Miss Lynn, I should like to make a small proposition, a wager if you will, a friendly one." I felt my stomach go cold. I have been a librarian long enough to know that the propositions of rich men can go in many directions, and not all of them kind. I started to speak. Mr. Ashworth lifted his hand. "Margaret, hear me out. The wager is this. I should like to ask Miss Lynn to play the whole Schubert impromptu in G-flat major from memory, on this Blüthner with a blindfold I shall tie around her eyes with my own handkerchief in the next 6 minutes. The whole impromptu, not a phrase missed, not a note hesitated on. If she does so, I shall this evening sign a check to your library for the full cost of the roof, the new wing, the children's room expansion, and a 20-year endowed fund for your music collection. The total figure I have in mind is not a small one. If she fails by even one phrase, I shall do what I had been about to do tonight, which is wish you well and decline to receive any further correspondence." I looked at Tessa. I could not read her face. I said, "Mr. Ashworth, this is not necessary. Tessa is here as my driver. She has not come to perform for." Tessa said, "Mrs. Holloway, may I speak, please?" I stopped. Mr. Ashworth waited. Tessa said, "Mr. Ashworth, I am willing, but I would like to ask one thing. If I succeed, and I do not say I will, I would like the check made out, not in my name and not in the library's name, but in the name of the library, with a small clause specifying that the music collection's endowed fund be open to free piano lessons for the children of the town. Once a week in the children's corner by a teacher of the library's choosing. That is all. Will you agree to that?" Mr. Ashworth looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and the smile this time was a different smile from the polite and final one. It was the smile of a man who has just been outflanked by a quiet young woman in a brown jumper and who has decided on the spot that he likes it. He said, "I shall agree. Take the bench, Miss Lynn. I shall fetch my handkerchief." The handkerchief was a fine white linen square. He folded it carefully into a band, came around behind her and tied it gently across her eyes. She did not move. She did not adjust the bench. She set her hands above the keys of the Blüthner, paused for one quiet breath, and began the Schubert impromptu in G-flat major. I'm not going to try to describe to you what she played. I have heard the recording many times in my life. I have heard it played by famous pianists in concert halls in 3 countries. I have not, until that September evening in Mr. Ashworth's long oak-paneled drawing room, with a fine white linen handkerchief tied across her eyes by his own hand, heard it played as Tessa Lynn played it that night. The opening figure laid itself down with the quiet of a hand on a child's hair. The long sad theme rose, fell, rose again. The brief brighter middle section gave its small light and stepped politely back. The recapitulation arrived as if it had been waiting in the next room all along. Tessa did not at any point in the 6 minutes miss a phrase. She did not at any point hesitate on a note. She played, blindfolded, on a Blüthner she had touched for the first time 30 seconds earlier, the whole of the Schubert impromptu in G-flat major as if she had been playing it on that instrument for 20 years. She let the last chord fade. She lifted her hands and laid them in her lap. She did not lift the blindfold. Mr. Vincent Ashworth, 68 years old, collector of pianos, declined the public cause for 15 years, walked slowly around to the front of the Blüthner. He stood for a moment looking at her. Then he untied the handkerchief himself, very gently, and folded it back into a square. He did not return it to his pocket. He laid it instead on the polished wood of the Blüthner beside her hands. He said, "Miss Lynn, you have won the wager. You have also won, I think, my evening. You have certainly won my library's roof and Mrs. Holloway's new wing. I shall sign the check in the morning. The clause regarding the piano lessons will be honored to the letter. The endowed fund will be in your name if you will permit it. The teacher of the library's choosing will, if you will agree, be you, on whatever schedule suits a young woman who works full-time at a library and ought, by every right, to be at a conservatory instead. We shall discuss the conservatory question another evening. Tonight I have intruded enough." Tessa said very quietly, "Thank you, sir. I would be glad to teach the children. It would honor my father." Then, after a moment, she said, "And Mr. Ashworth, thank you for the handkerchief. It was very kind of you to fold it carefully." He looked at her with the look of a man who has not been told he has done a small kind thing in a great many years. He bowed to her, actually bowed from the waist, in the long oak-paneled drawing room in his dark grey suit, and he said, "Miss Lynn, it was the least I could do." We drove home that night in the small library car. Tessa drove. She did not speak for the first 10 minutes. Then she said, "Mrs. Holloway, I hope I did not overstep." I said, "Tessa, you did not overstep. You have, this evening, secured the future of the Wexham Free Library." She nodded. She drove the rest of the way in her usual quiet. When she pulled up at my house, she said, "Mrs. Holloway, I would prefer that the piano lesson part of the arrangement be the part the trustees announce publicly. The rest can be in the small print. The children's part is the part that matters." I have honored that wish. The roof was mended that spring. The new wing opened the following autumn. The children's room expansion opened a year after that. Tessa Lynn gives a free piano lesson on the upright in the children's corner every Saturday morning between 10 and 1. She has a waiting list. There are now 7 children from the town who play, in their parents' words, properly because of those lessons. One of them, a small girl of 9, is being entered next year for the regional junior competition. Mr. Vincent Ashworth comes up to the library on the last Saturday of every month. He sits at the back of the children's corner in his dark grey suit very quietly and listens. He never interrupts. He has in the years since become the library's most generous donor, and he has done so on the simple understanding set by Tessa that September evening in front of a blindfolded Schubert, that the giving is about the children and not about him. I keep the white linen handkerchief in a small velvet-lined drawer at the front desk. He gave it to me the morning after the wager with a short note. The note said only, "I was tied. Please keep this somewhere safe." It is the proof that I learned something on a September evening from a young woman in a brown jumper that I had needed to learn for 40 years. V.A. I look at the handkerchief sometimes on the long, quiet afternoons. I think about the row of 7 pianos along the western wall of Ashworth Hall. I think about a young assistant librarian in her brown jumper, sitting at the center of that row with a fine white linen blindfold tied gently across her eyes by the owner himself, playing the Schubert impromptu in G-flat major from memory in 6 minutes without a hesitation. And I think, as Mr. Ashworth, I believe, was thinking when he untied the handkerchief, about how often the person in any room who knows the most about the music, or the books, or the children, or the small careful kindnesses of folding a handkerchief properly before laying it down, is the quietest person in the room. The one who has been standing in the corridor, with her hands clasped, waiting to drive the head librarian home.